There are moments in life that arrive so quietly you almost miss them. A passing glance. A trembling breath. A sentence spoken so softly that the world keeps moving without realizing that everything has just changed. Tonight's story begins with one of those moments. Somewhere, beyond the noise of ordinary days, two hearts have been carrying words too heavy to speak aloud. One heart belongs to someone who has loved in silence far longer than anyone imagined. The other may remind you more of yourself than you expected. Stay with this story until the very end, because what begins as a whisper will soon become something that no one who witnessed it could ever forget. The evening sky had turned the color of fading embers when the old chapel on the hill welcomed its final visitors. It was not famous. It did not appear in travel guides. Most people drove past it without ever wondering what memories lived inside its weathered wooden doors. But on this particular evening, the silence surrounding that place felt almost alive, as though the wind itself was waiting for something that had taken years to happen. A young man stood beneath the ancient oak tree beside the chapel. His hands rested deep inside his coat pockets, though they could not hide the slight trembling in his fingers. He had rehearsed this moment countless times while driving to work, while washing dishes, while lying awake after midnight. Every version sounded perfect inside his imagination. Every version dissolved into uncertainty the instant reality arrived. Across the stone pathway, a young woman slowly approached. Neither of them smiled at first. Sometimes the deepest affection is too overwhelmed for immediate happiness. She carried no flowers. He carried no gift. Between them existed only years of unfinished conversations, missed opportunities, misunderstood silence, and feelings that had quietly survived every season despite never receiving permission to bloom. The air smelled of fresh rain. Leaves whispered overhead. Even the birds seemed strangely absent, leaving the world wrapped inside a peaceful stillness. Neither realized they were being watched. Not by strangers. By life itself. By every difficult season that had prepared them for this exact evening. By every disappointment that had taught them patience. By every unanswered prayer that had slowly shaped them into people capable of hearing truth instead of simply wanting it. The woman finally stopped only a few feet away. For several long seconds, neither spoke. Not because they lacked words. Because the first sentence would determine everything that followed. He looked toward the fading sunlight instead of into her eyes. "I almost didn't come." She gave a quiet laugh that carried more relief than amusement. "I know. You knew?" "I almost didn't come either." Their eyes finally met. There was no dramatic music. No sudden miracle. Just two ordinary people discovering how extraordinary honesty can feel after years of pretending everything is fine. The young man inhaled deeply. "There were so many times I wanted to tell you something." "I know. You knew that too." "I hoped." Hope. Such a small word. Yet sometimes hope quietly carries entire lifetimes across impossible distances. The wind gently lifted strands of her hair across her face. Without thinking, he almost reached forward to move them aside. Almost. His hand stopped halfway. Old habits of hesitation refused to disappear so easily. She noticed. She noticed everything. She always had. Which made the next silence even heavier than the first. Because now neither could hide behind uncertainty anymore. The truth was standing between them, patiently waiting to be welcomed. Far away, church bells echoed across the valley. Not because of a ceremony. Simply because evening had arrived. Yet somehow their sound felt strangely personal. The young woman looked toward the chapel windows glowing softly in golden light. When people asked me why I never moved on. She paused. I never had an answer they could understand. He lowered his eyes. His heartbeat suddenly became impossible to ignore. She continued. I tried convincing myself that what I felt would disappear. It didn't. She slowly shook her head. No. Only one word. Yet that single word carried years of hidden emotion. He smiled, though tears quietly gathered before he realized they had formed. I thought I was the only one. She whispered almost immediately. So did I. Neither understood why those 4 simple words felt heavier than every speech they had ever practiced. Because genuine feelings rarely arrive wrapped inside perfect language. They arrive imperfect. Honest. Unprotected. Exactly as they are. Clouds drifted slowly across the moon, now beginning to appear above the hillside. The temperature cooled. Still neither wanted to leave. The conversation had finally reached the place where pretending was no longer possible. He stepped slightly closer. Not enough to invade her space. Only enough to remind her she was no longer standing alone. There were days, he admitted quietly, when I watched my phone hoping your name would appear. She smiled through tears. There were nights I typed messages to you. His breathing stopped. You did? I deleted every single one. Why? Because I was afraid silence would hurt less than rejection. He closed his eyes. For the first time that evening, regret arrived without warning. Not the kind that destroys hope. The kind that reveals how many beautiful moments fear quietly steals from ordinary lives. A cool breeze passed between them. Somewhere nearby, a single lantern flickered outside the chapel entrance. Its warm light danced across the stone pathway like tiny golden stars. Neither noticed another elderly couple leaving the chapel after evening prayer. The older woman glanced toward the 2 younger souls standing beneath the oak tree. She gently squeezed her husband's hand. Without speaking, both smiled. Some stories become recognizable before a single ending has been written. The elderly couple walked away slowly. Yet before disappearing down the hill, the old gentleman quietly said something to his wife. They've waited long enough. The younger pair never heard those words. But somehow the evening itself seemed to. Because something invisible shifted. The heaviness that had filled the air began giving way to unexpected peace. The young woman looked toward him again. I need to tell you something. His heart raced faster than ever before. What is it? She hesitated. Not because she doubted her feelings. Because once spoken, they could never return to silence. I've carried this inside me for so long that sometimes I forgot what life felt like before it. He remained perfectly still. I kept wondering whether timing mattered, whether people could arrive too late, whether love could survive years without permission. She laughed softly through tears again. And then I realized something. What? Real feelings don't disappear just because they're hidden. The wind suddenly grew stronger. Tree branches swayed overhead. The lantern near the chapel flickered brighter for only a moment. He looked at her as though seeing her for the very first time. Not through memory. Not through imagination. But through complete truth. Every wall he had built around his heart suddenly felt unnecessary. Every excuse sounded smaller. Every fear weaker. He took one careful step closer. I don't want to leave tonight wondering what would have happened. Neither did she. Yet before another word could be spoken, the chapel doors slowly opened once more. An elderly caretaker stepped outside carrying a small wooden box. He looked around until his eyes found the two standing beneath the oak tree. His expression changed instantly. Almost as though he had been expecting them. He walked toward them at an unhurried pace. When he finally reached the tree, he smiled with surprising warmth. I've been looking for the two of you. Both exchanged confused glances. You know us? The old man nodded gently. Not by name. He lifted the weathered wooden box into the fading light. But someone asked me many years ago to give this to two people, on the night they finally found the courage to tell each other the truth. Neither spoke. Neither breathed. Because engraved across the lid of that forgotten wooden box were words neither of them had ever seen before. And somehow, impossibly, those words seemed to have been waiting specifically for them. The old caretaker slowly reached for the ancient brass latch. Then, with one quiet motion, he began to open the box. The brass latch released with a soft click. For one suspended second, the old caretaker did not lift the lid. His hands remained resting on the box as if he understood that whatever waited inside was not merely an object, but a doorway. The young man and woman stood beneath the moving branches, their earlier confession now overshadowed by a mystery neither could explain. The chapel lights glowed behind them, casting long shadows across the wet stones. Then the lid opened. Inside lay a folded letter, a small silver key, and a photograph faded by time. The young woman reached toward the photograph first. Her fingers stopped before touching it. The image showed the same oak tree beneath which they were standing, but the picture had clearly been taken decades earlier. A younger version of the caretaker stood near the trunk beside another man and woman. The couple in the photograph were smiling, though something about their expression carried the fragile happiness of people who knew their time together would not be simple. The young man leaned closer. Who are they? The caretaker looked toward the chapel. The man was my brother. His voice had changed. The warmth remained, but beneath it lived an old sorrow polished smooth by years of carrying it. And the woman? The caretaker looked directly at the young woman. Her grandmother. The night seemed to narrow around them. She stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. My grandmother? Yes. But she never spoke about this place. She was never able to. The caretaker carefully lifted the letter from the box. The paper had yellowed at the edges, and the seal bore a delicate imprint of two intertwined branches. The young woman's hands began to tremble. My grandmother passed away when I was 12. I know. That answer unsettled her more than everything else. How could you know that? Because she wrote to me shortly before she died. The young man stepped closer to her without thinking. This time, there was no hesitation in the gesture. His shoulder nearly touched hers, a quiet promise that whatever emerged from the past, she would not face it alone. The caretaker held the letter between them. She asked me to keep this safe until a particular moment. What moment? The young man asked. The old man's eyes shifted toward him. The moment her granddaughter returned here with the person she had chosen, even if she had not yet admitted that choice to herself. The woman looked down at the photograph again. 1,000 questions crowded behind her silence. She had known her grandmother as gentle but guarded, a woman who kept old recipes in handwritten notebooks and pressed wildflowers between the pages of books. She had spoken about kindness, courage, and the cost of waiting too long, yet never once had she mentioned a secret love or a chapel on a hill. The caretaker placed the photograph in her hands. Your grandmother loved my brother deeply. What happened to them? They were separated by a decision neither of them made. The wind moved through the oak leaves with a low, rushing sound. The caretaker continued. Her family believed love should be practical. Safe. Approved by everyone who believed they knew what was best. My brother had little money and no important name. He had only plans, devotion, and more hope than wisdom. The young man lowered his eyes. The description landed closer to his own fears than he wanted to admit. They planned to leave together, the caretaker said. Not to run away from responsibility, but to begin a life somewhere they would not be measured by what they lacked. Did they? The woman asked. No. The answer came gently, but it struck with finality. On the morning they were supposed to meet here, my brother was injured on the road. By the time he recovered, he had been told she had chosen someone else. She hadn't? No. And she was told he had changed his mind. The young woman pressed the photograph against her chest. The truth was simple enough to understand and painful enough to feel impossible. A lifetime had been redirected by two lies. The caretaker looked at the young couple before him. They both eventually built separate lives. My beloved child. No one moved. The words on the envelope seemed to quiet the entire chapel. The old caretaker held it with both hands, almost reverently, as though he understood that this final letter had waited years for exactly this moment. The young woman looked at the familiar handwriting and felt memories rush through her all at once, her father's reassuring smile, the way he always paused before offering advice, and the quiet strength that had guided her through life's hardest seasons. With trembling fingers, the young man accepted the envelope. You should read it, the caretaker whispered. He carefully opened the seal. Inside was a single folded page. The ink had faded slightly, but every word remained clear. If you are reading this, then my daughter has chosen to stand beside you of her own free heart. That means you already possess the only quality I ever truly hoped she would find: patience. The young man swallowed hard. The young woman reached for his hand. He continued reading. Years ago, I recognized something growing between the two of you. I also recognized something inside you that reminded me of myself when I was young. You believed you had to become successful before you deserved lasting love. I asked you to step away not because I doubted your heart, but because I wanted you to discover that your worth could never be measured by what you owned. Tears filled the young man's eyes. So, you knew? The woman whispered. He nodded slowly. He told me he wasn't trying to keep us apart forever. He said if what we shared was genuine, time would never destroy it. But if it disappeared, then it was never meant to carry the weight of a lifetime. She closed her eyes. For years she had mistaken silence for abandonment. Now she understood it had been the painful consequence of a promise made out of respect, not rejection. The young man continued. If you are still standing beside her today, then you have already passed the only test that matters. You chose integrity over convenience. Now choose honesty over fear. A gentle peace settled over the room. The unanswered questions that had haunted both of them for years no longer demanded explanations. They simply dissolved. The woman smiled through tears. I spent so much of my life believing you stopped loving me. He shook his head. I never stopped. There wasn't a single year. Not one. There wasn't a single season. I carried you through every one. She laughed softly, wiping away tears that no longer came from sorrow alone. And I thought I was the only one. The caretaker quietly walked toward the old cedar chest and carefully placed the heirloom ring back inside. It belongs here, he said warmly. Its purpose was never to complete a story that ended long ago. He looked toward the younger couple. It was waiting to help begin another. The young man looked down at the small ring box still resting in his hands. This time, there was no hesitation. No rehearsed speech. No perfect script. Only truth. He slowly knelt before her. The chapel seemed to disappear until only the two of them remained. I can't promise a life without difficult days. She smiled. I wouldn't believe you if you did. I can't promise we'll always know the right answers. We'll learn them together. He nodded. I can promise that you'll never again wonder whether you're loved. A quiet tear escaped her smile. I choose you not because life will always be easy, but because every version of tomorrow becomes more meaningful if you're walking beside me. He opened the ring box. Will you build that tomorrow with me? For a heartbeat, the world stood perfectly still. Then she gently knelt across from him. She took both of his hands before looking into his eyes. I've been answering that question inside my heart for years. Her smile grew brighter. My answer has always been yes. The ring slipped onto her finger as the chapel bells began to ring once again. This time, they were not simply marking the passing of another evening. They seemed to celebrate two hearts that had finally laid down every fear, every misunderstanding, and every unfinished sentence. The caretaker quietly wiped a tear from his cheek. Outside, the clouds parted. Moonlight poured through the chapel windows, covering the wooden floor in silver light. It felt as though the entire hill had been waiting to witness this moment. The old oak tree swayed gently in the night breeze. Its roots had stood through countless seasons, storms, and changing years. Yet tonight it reminded them of something beautifully simple. The strongest things in life are rarely those that grow quickly. They are the ones that keep reaching toward the light, even when no one notices. As they stepped outside together, the young woman looked toward the stars. My grandmother never received the ending she dreamed about. The caretaker smiled. No. But because she chose forgiveness instead of bitterness, because your father chose wisdom instead of control, because you both chose truth instead of fear. He looked lovingly at them. Their story became the bridge that carried yours. The young man gently wrapped his arm around the woman. For the first time in years, neither of them wondered what might have been. They were finally living what could be. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle of all. Not that every question receives an answer. Not that every road is free from hardship. But that love, when rooted in honesty, has a remarkable way of redeeming even the longest seasons of waiting. So if this story found you tonight, let it remind you that courage often begins with a single honest conversation. The future is not built by perfect people, it is built by hearts willing to tell the truth, extend grace, and keep choosing one another when it matters most. May your heart be filled with peace, your path be guided by wisdom, and your days be blessed with relationships that are rooted in kindness, patience, and genuine love. May you always have the courage to speak what is true, the strength to forgive what is painful, and the faith to believe that hope can bloom even after long seasons of waiting. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who may need a reminder that honest love is never wasted. Until next time, may peace, hope, and countless blessings walk with you wherever your journey leads.